Sting, you're fired!
I'm not fired. You're fired.
No.
The fucking cover of Modern Drummer magazine is going to be fucking devoted to that drum fill, you cunt.
It's amazing that you could play that drum fill in 9 beats.
Right? Just because it's a little confusing for the fucking bass playing element.
Tell you what, should we film me whooping Sting?
Yes,
That would be good, wouldn't
that
it?
would be great. That's that.
So do you think there's going to be police around for quite a long time yet?
We'll probably break up again next week.
We're interminable.
What happens when two musical geniuses can't stand to share the same stage? The Police were one of the biggest bands in the world, selling out stadiums and rewriting what rock could sound like. But behind the hits, Sting and Stewart Copeland were locked in a battle so intense it nearly tore every song apart. And the shocking truth about how it all collapsed is something fans never saw coming. When the Police formed in London in 1977, few could have predicted how fast they'd rise. Sting, Stewart Copeland, and later Andy Summers didn't just chase trends, they created their own sound, fusing punk urgency with reggae rhythms and pop hooks. By the early 80s, they were no longer just another new wave band. They were global superstars. Roxanne, Message in a Bottle, Don't Stand So Close to Me. These weren't just hits, they were anthems that defined a generation. But beneath the surface of their soaring fame, cracks were already forming. Sting's knack for sharp, radio-ready songwriting meant more of the spotlight turned toward him. Stewart Copeland, whose explosive, unpredictable drumming had given the band its raw energy, felt increasingly sidelined. Even Andy Summers, the quiet backbone with his shimmering guitar textures, noticed the tension. What began as creative differences soon grew into bruised egos, long recording sessions filled with arguments, and battles over control. The strange part? That friction fueled their early success. The push and pull between Sting's polished vision and Copeland's chaotic drive gave the Police their edge. But as the crowds got bigger, the stakes rose higher, and the fragile balance within the band became harder to hold. As the fame grew, so did the tension. Stewart Copeland saw music as an explosion of raw energy, unpredictable, wild, and alive. Sting, on the other hand, wanted precision. To him, songs weren't just jams, they were crafted statements, tightly controlled to reach perfection. That difference might sound small, but inside the studio, it became war. Copeland later admitted he would sometimes stare at Sting across the room in pure fury, convinced the singer was trying to box in his playing. Sting, for his part, grew tired of what he saw as Copeland's chaos and made it clear that the Police would follow his vision. Andy Summers often joked that he felt like the referee between two fighters who never agreed on the rules. It got so bad that during the recording of Synchronicity, they had to track in separate rooms to avoid exploding at each other. Copeland even said he once wanted to choke Sting mid-session because every note seemed like a battle. And yet, ironically, that same push and pull is what gave the Police their magic. The mix of Sting's structure and Copeland's fire created a sound no one else had. But with each new success, the arguments only sharpened, and soon the biggest album of their career would also become the moment everything broke. By 1983, the Police were the biggest band on Earth. Their fifth studio album, Synchronicity, would go on to sell over 8 million copies in the US alone and cement their place in history. But while the world heard flawless hits like Every Breath You Take and King of Pain, the band themselves were barely holding together. Recording sessions were often tense and fractured. Sting insisted on recording his vocals and bass in isolation, while Stewart Copeland's drums were tracked separately after explosive arguments derailed progress. Andy Summers recalled walking into the studio to find Sting and Copeland refusing to speak to each other, their communication reduced to musical standoffs. Copeland later admitted the atmosphere was toxic, saying that every song was a tug of war between Sting's control and his own instincts. Even Sting, reflecting years later, said the band's chemistry had burned itself out, describing it as three men in a room, hating each other. And yet, the results were undeniable. Synchronicity wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural moment, topping charts worldwide and earning the band critical acclaim. Their Shea Stadium performance that same year was hailed as their Everest. But for Sting, that night marked not triumph, but closure. He allegedly turned to a friend afterward and said, "We've reached the top. Now there's nowhere left to go." That single thought would seal the fate of the Police. Unlike other legendary rock bands that imploded in public, the Police didn't have one explosive press conference or a dramatic farewell. Their breakup came quietly, almost like a whisper. After the monumental Synchronicity tour in 1984, the three members simply drifted in different directions. There was no official statement, no curtain call, just silence. And fans were left wondering if the world's biggest band had really called it quits. Sting was the first to move on. He launched a solo career that immediately put him back at the top of the charts, with albums like The Dream of the Blue Turtles proving he could blend pop, jazz, and political commentary without missing a beat. Stewart Copeland threw himself into film scoring, creating acclaimed soundtracks for movies and TV where his restless creativity could finally roam free without being boxed in by Sting's exacting standards. Andy Summers, the often overlooked glue of the group, explored his own projects, from collaborations with Robert Fripp to solo albums that revealed the depth of his experimental guitar style. Rumors swirled for years about a final straw. Some insiders said Sting's control had become unbearable. Others pointed to Copeland's frustration boiling over in the studio, or Summers feeling increasingly sidelined as Sting's fame skyrocketed. But most agreed, the Police weren't destroyed by one dramatic blow-up. They were eroded by years of competing visions and egos too large to share the same space. For fans, it was surreal. At their peak, the Police were untouchable, selling out stadiums worldwide, and then, almost overnight, they vanished, leaving behind only questions and a legacy frozen at its absolute height. More than 22 years after their breakup, the unthinkable happened. In 2007, the Police reunited. For fans, it felt like a miracle. The band that had burned so brightly and then disappeared without explanation was suddenly back on stage, launching one of the most successful reunion tours in rock history. The numbers were staggering, grossing over $360 million across 150 shows. It became one of the highest-earning tours ever. Fans from multiple generations packed arenas, eager to relive the magic of Roxanne, Every Breath You Take, and Message in a Bottle one last time. But behind the glittering success, the old tensions hadn't vanished. Stewart Copeland described the reunion as therapy, a way to confront decades of resentment and finally understand one another. He admitted there were still moments of friction with Sting, but this time they could laugh about them rather than explode. Andy Summers, too, reflected that it was cathartic, a chance to rewrite the ending of the Police story with dignity instead of bitterness. Sting, however, remained cautious. While he embraced the nostalgia and acknowledged the magic they still created together, he was firm that the reunion would be a closed chapter. He said, "It was wonderful, but I wouldn't do it again. That would be a bridge too far." The band refused to record new material, with Sting making it clear that his creative path was elsewhere. For fans, the reunion was bittersweet. They got to see the Police one final time at their peak, not as a tired nostalgia act, but as a band that could still electrify a stadium. And yet the lack of new music confirmed what many had suspected all along. The chemistry that made the Police unstoppable on stage could never survive in the studio again. Just when it seemed the story of the police had settled into history, a shocking twist dragged them back into the headlines. In 2025, news broke of a lawsuit filed by Stewart Copeland and Andy Summers against Sting, alleging unpaid royalties tied to decades of the police's catalog. For fans, it was déjà vu. The very tensions that had split the band in the 1980s were suddenly spilling into courtrooms 4 decades later. At the heart of the feud was Every Breath You Take, one of the most played songs in history. Sting has long been credited as the sole songwriter, meaning the lion's share of publishing royalties flowed to him. Copeland and Summers, however, argued that their contributions, the unmistakable drum pulse and that haunting guitar riff, were integral to the song's identity and should entitle them to a larger cut. Stewart even hinted that he'd been owed for years, calling it less about money and more about recognition. The lawsuit shocked fans who had believed the 2007 reunion tour had healed old wounds. Instead, it highlighted how unresolved their disputes really were. Sting, for his part, has remained mostly silent, but insiders suggest he sees the claims as an attack on his authorship and legacy. Meanwhile, Summers has spoken cautiously, saying it's about fairness, not revenge.
This legal battle isn't just about old royalties. It could reshape how credit is assigned in collaborative bands. If Copeland and Summers succeed, it may set a precedent for other groups where one member dominated the songwriting credits, while others provided defining contributions. In other words, the feud of 2025 could end up changing the music industry just as much as the police once did on stage.